Christ is risen, indeed he is risen. Alleluia. Welcome to Veritatis Vox, a new channel devoted to being a voice for the voice of truth, who is our Lord Jesus Christ, risen from the dead. My name is Matt Gaspers, and I'm joined this evening by my good friend Ryan Grant, coming from the West Coast up in Oregon. Good to have you with me or Idaho, excuse me. Yeah, I don't know why I thought Oregon. Yes,
Don't
Idaho.
put me in over there.
uh, so this is my second stream today. I guess in baseball terms, I'm doing a double header today. So I'm glad to be with Ryan tonight. We're gonna provide what I've called a sober assessment of the Leo XIV pontificate thus far. You know, Ryan and I have exchanged a few texts back and forth, and just kind of saying it's interesting to see I think the word that I've been using is euphoria. I think it's waning now. It's because there's been some things that have happened and that people are starting to see, well, maybe he's not the greatest thing ever. But at the beginning, I mean, for that first week, for sure, it was intense. It was like, don't say anything critical under any circumstances, or you are going to hear about it. What do you think?
The Twitter, the artist formerly known as Twitter, it's Catholic Magisterium, Trad Magisterium will block you and something.
Yes, it was very interesting to watch. And I'll admit, like, seeing him come out on the loggia, well, I was working at the time, so I didn't actually get to see it live, but watching the video after the fact, it was nice to see him wearing the red mozzetta and praying in Latin. And it's not like there's been nothing positive. There have been some positive things. He's extolled um, the family as the bedrock of society and said some other praiseworthy things, but he's also said some rather concerning things. Um, so that's kind of why I wanted to discuss with someone who's kind of on the same page. I think Ryan and I are pretty much on the same page in that regard, that maybe at the beginning we kind of had some cautious optimism, and maybe we still do. I mean, all things are possible with God and through the power of grace, but I think realistically speaking, we might be dealing with a man who is much more similar to Francis, at least in terms of doctrine, maybe not personality, but certainly in terms of doctrine, than a lot of people are willing to admit. So,
I would be lying if I came out and said that I'm an expert in all things Cardinal Prevost prior to his elevation of the pontificate. I merely knew who he was because of when he was appointed to the congregation for bishops. I said, "Oh, great, another Chicago boy going into bishops," without knowing that actually he's spent most of his life in Peru, or most of his church life in Peru,
right?
And he's or much of it anyway. And that he's actually had, he left Chicago, I think, even before Supage got there, because before that, Supage was over next door to me in Spokane.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
He, where he caused a lot of problems over there. But anyway, and we're not gonna make it a stream about Supage. So I knew that they didn't have any, now since he's become Pope, I went back and looked in and said, oh, there is no connection with that. But so I recognized that at the time in the Strickland affair, he would have been the one, making a lot of those decisions. And it's a, so I'm sitting here now. We have all things that I always predicted there would not be an American Pope for another 50 years. It would take kind of that long for the United States to sit on the world stage in such a way where it would be kind of normal you would elect an American Pope. I thought for sure that it was so many years off.
Same.
But in a certain sense, at least as far as Europeans go, he comes off more like them rather than like us. So he has a nice international feel that would have made it a lot easier to vote for him and get over the various prejudices against him. Plus, I mean, he's worked with a lot of bishops. He's networked a lot. He's been, at the heart of the curious since Francis appointed him, and he's already been in various circles and through the synods and other things. So people know him. And well, know what to expect. That's why they elected him. So I think it's definitely, I think, kind of surreal optimism to expect there to be a Francis, or to be like a, oh, this is going to be a super traditional Pope. He's going to undo everything from Francis, given the fact that the majority of the cardinalate was appointed by Francis.
Right.
I think, on the other hand, can you be optimistic? And I think, and I can understand where people would say, "Hey, don't say anything bad. Oh, don't be doomers. Don't take the black pill, whatever."
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's like, so I kind of looked at it and I said, well, let's wait to see what he does
Mm-hmm.
before we jump to too many conclusions and jump. So on the one hand, I'm not going to, was not going to jump on the doomer train. My Twitter's been pretty quiet on now Pope Leo XIV,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, I just did not see any reason to jump into the adulation that seemed to be
Right.
coming from so many places in surprisingly trad corners, honestly.
Right. I think one example I remember that you commented on X or Twitter, I think it was Edward Habsburg mentioned something about the papal plural being back in play, and you explained that it's actually always been there. It just hasn't been
Mhm.
translated in English.
Right,
Something
and
to that effect.
still is not actually, because even that document that, God bless him, Edward Habsburg, love seeing him on the artist formerly known as Twitter. He's always got great content, and he actually will talk to you, even though he's a Habsburg and an
Right.
ambassador for the nation of Hungary. He'll
Right.
talk to anyone he thinks is of goodwill. He's sent me some messages in the past. We don't correspond like daily or anything like that,
Right.
but we have talked before. So just so no animus against him whatsoever.
No,
But
no, no.
beside that, it's one of those things. The very document he cited, both the actual translation they made into English and to other vernacular, it had just the normal singular. So it's a, it's I kind of looked at it as like, excitement. Now, of course, Edward Hosberg too. I mean, he's never. I'm not subscribing this to him because he never, that I ever saw, wrote anything critical of the late Holy Father. So
Mm-hmm.
he. He's a interesting character, but other people were picking up on that. Oh wow, look at all these things that are coming back. And I said, well, I mean, Francis didn't use a lot of Latin. I don't think there was any time he subconsciously celebrated mass in Latin. Some parts of it may have been in Latin that
Mm-hmm.
were done in the Vatican and prepared that way. But celebrating the Novus Ordo in Latin is a conscious choice, and I think people were reading more into that than what it actually is. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if he had celebrated Ad Orientem, that would probably be saying a lot, because that is a much bigger statement
I
than saying
agree.
Novus Ordo in Latin.
I agree with that for sure. You had something you mentioned to me that I thought we could pursue a little bit before I get into my major red flag, the first big one for me anyway. So our friend Dr. Peter Kwasniewski posted something on Facebook. I think I sent it to you, and it kind of went along with something that you had said. Like, you kind of see Leo as being like a John Paul III kind of figure. And I wanted to put this post up on, let me see if I can share my screen here so people can see what I'm talking about. Let's see. Here we go. I know that's kind of small, but I'll read it out loud so people. So this is what Peter posted on May 22nd. I think if people viewed Leo XIV as being rather like John Paul II, with all the good and the bad this implies, rather than as the long-awaited Pope who will scour the Shire, they would be a lot less disappointed and a lot more able to roll with the punches and even appreciate the good as it comes. Every pope since Vatican II has been a mixed bag, except for Francis, whom I don't see as a mixed bag, but as an unmixed catastrophe. All of them have promoted wonky interreligious dialoguing, for example. That is par for the course. To express shock or horror at this is like expressing surprise that movies nowadays are usually dumb, tasteless, and offensive. And I see what he's saying, but at the same time, I don't think we should become desensitized to the fact that those things are
Mhm.
outrageous, um, just because they've become the norm over the last few decades. Because that's one of the red flags for me was his Leo's address when he met with an interreligious group in the Vatican. We can get to that in a moment, but I guess that's where I kind of disagree with Peter a little bit, is that I don't want to become desensitized to these things and think, well, it's just par for the course, and move on and celebrate the good things. I think we
Mhm.
do need to speak up
Mhm.
um, and voice that. So,
And I would tend to agree with that, because it's it does become a certain level of complacency. Yeah, we expect, or you think of like Boccaccio in the Decameron, where he's laying out a Jew who's converted to the faith, that he's talking to one of his former co-religionists, and his fellow Jew, says, "I heard that you became a Catholic." He said, "Oh yes." "Why did you do that? Haven't you ever been to the papal court?" And then Boccaccio's Jewish convert character says, "Yes, I have." "Well, haven't you seen what goes on there?" "Oh yes." "Well, how could you do this?" And he said, "Well, it's simple. If God wasn't upholding the thing, it would have fallen apart a long time ago." It's usual refrain to make light of the disaster of corruption in the church, and then try to parody off, into God's grace, which, I mean, it's a good way to have lighthearted humor, but there's also a negative side of that. You just kind of, you expect it. Yeah, that's what they're going to do. You get desensitized. That's not what they should do. We need more of a Pius X than we do of a Sixtus IV or a John XII, God forbid, or something like that,
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, I wonder, it seems like, I'm glad that I think Leo XIV is a decent papal name to take. It's certainly better than Francis II, for example. And I'm trying to find, I think it was in that address to the cardinals, and that's where the first red flag was for me. But let me read that first, where he describes why he took this name. So this was from his first address to the College of Cardinals on May 10th. So that was day 3 of his pontificate. He was elected May 8th. And he says towards the end of the address, sensing myself called to continue in this same path, I chose to take the name Leo XIV. There are different reasons for this, but mainly because Pope Leo XIII, in his historic encyclical Rerum Novarum, addressed the social question in the context of the first great industrial revolution. In our own day, the Church offers to everyone the treasury of her social teaching in response to another industrial revolution and to developments in the fields of artificial intelligence that pose new challenges for the defense of human dignity, justice, and labor. My concern, I suppose, is that Leo XIV, Prevost, is seeing Leo XIII as kind of like this prototypical liberal, when in fact he was a vehement, he fought vehemently against liberalism in various ways, and that seemed, yeah, the social justice warriors love to pick up on Catholic social teaching when they see it as like a means of basically promoting socialism, and they don't understand that it's like the antithesis of socialism. It's all about the social kingship of Christ, and I don't see him talking about that at all.
Yeah, that was something that, like, at first, as when I listened to it, when he said that, and I was at the address, and I'm checking it, listening to it, and following the Italian, and it's like, okay, good, good. Upheavals, modern revolutions, okay. AI, and I'm seeing parallels with the Industrial Revolution, where now you've industrialized so much that the average tradespeople had at the time, couldn't keep up. So then people lost everything, their entire means of support, and there was no system in place to help transition or help the new technology develop in such a way where it would be beneficial to tradesmen and they could take it on and not lose their livelihood. Instead, it all centralizes stuff in factories, and then accommodating that had caused a real revolution. It's quite a few. It's a rerum novarum of revolutions. It's that Roman idiom res novae, new things. It doesn't mean new thing. It means revolution, right? And an upsetting of the order. So you think of what AI potentially could do for people's jobs now. I mean, learn to code. The AI would code for you as long as you have modicum of knowledge of what you're doing. So much for Zuckerberg and his, yeah, let's just have people learn to code. It's that's a potentially concerning thing. So I'm hearing that, I'm seeing that parallel immediately. Good, good, but then it's all couched in human dignity, all these buzzwords from the late Holy Father's pontificate. So now it's like, okay, so where exactly are we going? It doesn't sound, it sounds like meet the new boss, same as the old boss, honestly.
Right. And so the first major red flag for me was also in this same address. Let me see if I'll share it on the screen so people can see, and if anybody wants to follow along or have this in their internet bookmarks or whatever, this is the link that I'm reading from. I'll put it in the live chat there. So let me see here, put this up so people can see it. All right, so many different steps. Oh, what did I do? It's hard to be the producer and the host at the same time. You know how that is on the rundown, right? Okay, now I think I got it. Here we go. Okay, so this was his address on May 10th, and specifically I'm talking about, all right, so he says to the cardinals, I would like us, here's where I'm reading, I would like us to renew together today our complete commitment to the path that the Universal Church has now followed for decades in the wake of the Second Vatican Council. Pope Francis masterfully and concretely set it forth in the Apostolic Exhortation Evangelii Gaudium, from which I would like to highlight several fundamental points. And then he goes on to list several. So the return to the primacy of Christ in proclamation, the missionary conversion of the entire Christian community, growth in collegiality and synodality, attention to the sensus fidei, especially in its most authentic and inclusive forms, such as popular piety, loving care for the least and the rejected, courageous and trusting dialogue with the contemporary world in its various components and realities. So that was kind of like nails on a chalkboard for me, honestly. Like, so we're going to continue in the same path that's been a disaster for the church, which even John Paul II, who loved the council, he was a man of the council and said the council was the great grace of the 20th century and that it needs to be followed and implemented. Even he admitted that Europe, for example, in his apostolic exhortation on Europe, said they were in a state of silent apostasy.
Mm-hmm.
And Benedict XVI on various occasions essentially acknowledged the same thing. They just refused to connect the dots and see the causality between the council and the crisis. And then even more, like adding insult to injury, like pouring salt into an open wound, holding up Evangelii Gaudium as the roadmap. I mean, it's outrageous.
That was probably the last. Well, no, I did read Laudato Si, and then I did read Jailers of the Tradition, as I affectionately translate it. Where custos can mean a jailer,
Yeah.
you know. And so, but beside that, you know, and there was like and that was so long. It was so like it was bloat. You know, it's like a lot of platitudes. It wasn't concise and
right.
Simple, very self-referential, I might add. And so, I mean, if we go through these points, you know, in and of themselves, some of those sound pretty good. The return to the primacy of Christ in proclamation, preaching Christ crucified, as St. Paul says. Mm-hmm. And then the missionary conversion of the entire Christian community. Well, yeah, I mean, everyone is always called to conversion, to being better, you know, Christians turning away from bad lives. You know, so growth in collegiality and synodality. And of course, there's, you know, one of your buzzwords. Although if you think of collegiality and how it was always billed, it could be a good thing in as much as less top-heavy, crushing Latin masses from above. And but then, of course, it could be bad too. Then you get the bishop wants to do that, and Rome's leaving everybody alone. So you know, I don't know. That cuts both ways. Collegiality is a separate thing we can talk about. Attention to the sensus fidei, especially in its most authentic and inclusive forms, such as popular piety. So that's one of those ones I kind of think of. All right, well, you think of the sensus fidei, the sense of faith, right? As it's realized within the people, and you'd be thinking, well, you know, that could be a good thing, right? But then, you know, what does he do? He cites numbers 119 through 120 of Evangelii Gaudium, and so let me read where that phrase appears. Quote, this is from Pope Francis's Evangelii Gaudium. The Spirit guides it in truth and leads it to salvation. As part of his mysterious love for humanity, God furnishes the totality of the faithful with an instinct of faith, sensus fidei, which helps them to discern what is truly of God. The presence of the Spirit gives Christians a certain connaturality with divine realities and a wisdom which enables them to grasp those realities intuitively, even when they lack the wherewithal to give them precise expression. Next, number 120. In the virtue of their baptism, all members of the people of God, come back to that in a minute, have become missionary disciples, All the baptized, whatever their position in the church or their level of institution in the faith, are agents of evangelization, and it would be insufficient to envisage a plan of evangelization to be carried out by professionals, while the rest of the faithful would simply be passive recipients. I was like, on the other hand, that could, if you turn around, like, and what's the new mass then? Anyway, the new evangelization calls for personal involvement on the part of each of the baptized. Every Christian is challenged here and now to be actively engaged in evangelization. Indeed, anyone who has truly experienced God's saving love does not need much time or lengthy training to go out and proclaim that love. Every Christian is a missionary to the extent that he or she has encountered the love of God in Christ Jesus. We no longer say that we are disciples and missionaries, but rather that we are always missionary disciples. If we are not convinced, let us look at those first apostles who immediately after encountering the gaze of Jesus went forth to proclaim him joyfully. We have found the Messiah, etc. And it goes on. But then you get to 121. Of course, all of us are called to mature in our work as evangelizers. We want to have better training, a deepening love and clearer witness to the gospel. In this sense, we ought to let others be constantly evangelizing us. But this does not mean that we should postpone the evangelizing mission. Rather, each of us should find ways to communicate Jesus wherever we are. All of us are called to offer others an explicit witness to the saving love of the Lord, who, despite our imperfections, offers us his closeness, his word, and his strength, and gives meaning to our lives. In your heart, you know that it is not the same to live without him. What you have to come to realize, what has helped you to live and given you hope, is what you also need to communicate to others. Our falling short of perfection should be no excuse. On the contrary, mission is a constant stimulus, not to remain mired in mediocrity, but to continue growing. The witness of faith that each Christian is called to offer leads us to say with St. Paul, now that I have already obtained this, or am already perfect, not that I have already obtained this or I'm already perfect, but I press on to make it my own because Christ Jesus has made me his own. So we backtrack. So what does all this mean? Some of it sounds fairly traditional and not bad, but the rub, it goes back into 120. In virtue of their baptism, all members of the people of God have become missionary disciples. All the baptized, whatever their position in the church or level of instruction in faith, are agents of evangelization. Now we have to remember, we're talking about someone who takes that phrase in Lumen Gentium, the Church of Christ subsists in the church, into a more heterodox direction, just based on his other statements in other places, that every member of the baptized, that includes people who aren't, in the faith, we're all part of the same missionary disciples in the church. And so what's the sensus fidei then, if one person has a sensus fidei that takes him in a certain direction to say things that are heterodox, things that aren't quite correct, as we know many of our brothers and sisters in the faith that, without knowing it, having been taught their entire lives this thing is the truth, and then they embrace things that actually are wrong, and take offense when you say, well, such and such actually is not a good moral life and not the way we should live. Well, actually, no, we can respect people with same-sex attraction and people who are transgendered, but no, we don't actually have to make special places for them and admit that there are things they do, however they came to it and however they came, because I don't want to trash anyone for their moral struggles or what have you, or the problems they suffer from. But we can't treat that as being normal. So a lot of people do, and that could be taken as the sensus fidei, and it's like it's become this kind of abstract thing. That's not, informed. He talks about instruction in the vaguest of senses, and we need the new evangelization calls for personal involvement of all the baptized, and he talks about where is it? I read it, but I can't. Oh, that's right. In this sense, we ought to let others be constantly evangelizing us, and I don't think it means it in the sense of like a teacher is often taught while teaching, as in the whole process of education causes you to also learn things while you're teaching, sometimes from your students when they ask questions, because they get you thinking, putting things together. I don't think that's what he's talking about. He's talking about instead, it's like a sharing of knowledge, and everyone's going to have a better faith experience.
Right.
And of evangelization, because it's nothing within the entirety of the document. Very little is actually defined. A lot of buzzwords, a lot of things that in and of themselves sound good, sound okay, but they're not, giving you a clear program. Where do we end up with from all this? Synodality.
Right.
That's what's being prepped with this sense that, let others be constantly evangelizing us, deepening of this witness. And that's what ultimately I think is going on there. And now calling back to these particular sections as he's talking about, and this is back to Leo, he talks about attention to the sensus fidei, and he says, especially in its most authentic and inclusive forms. So remember, we talked about your notion of the church, and by taking all the baptized, irrespective of their profession of faith or communion of the sacraments, and saying that they're all, or sorry, in the other sacraments, or their obedience to the hierarchy, what have you, or their communion with the hierarchy, in whatever sense we're going to talk about that, without that it's all the same vineyard, it's all the same thing, and
it's making the boundaries of the church very blurry. Kind of just as Lumen Gentium 8 does with that notion of the Church of Christ subsists in the Catholic Church.
Part of that is various manualists, when they're writing, they use the term subsistere, and you look, the term subsistere classically can actually mean essentially the same as to be the very thing,
right?
It's like an intensifying of your notion of existing in something, right? And that's its classical meaning, whereas its vernacular meaning, the cognate, doesn't carry that same meaning as you find in classical Latin. So it becomes this ambiguous term because you see it in this Neo-Latin document, but your immediate frame of reference is not to Seneca, where it appears to be used for is the thing, but kind of vernacular, where the notion of subsisting means it's like in a wider whole.
And I think the most concerning thing to me about Pope Leo referring to Evangelii Gaudium as, what does he call it? That Pope Francis masterfully and concretely set it forth, meaning the path that the church has been on since Vatican II. So this masterful roadmap, that's what he thinks of as Evangelii Gaudium. Apparently, this document has several major problems with it. I just wanted to cover a few others before we move on to another topic. But so, for example, Chris Ferrara has skewered this many times over the years. He's very talented at doing that. He's a great guy. So paragraph 27 of Evangelii Gaudium, it's kind of reminiscent of Martin Luther King Jr. because Francis says, I dream, and this is something he's used that terminology throughout his pontificate. I dream of a, quote, missionary option, that is a missionary impulse, capable of transforming everything so that the church's customs, ways of doing things, times and schedules, languages and structures can be suitably channeled for the evangelization of today's world rather than for her self-preservation. So it's very bizarre. He's pitting the mission of the church against her own self-preservation. And he's saying that literally everything needs to be transformed in the church, like nothing is off limits. That's very concerning. That's because then what is left? And ultimately the irony is that, as we see in other places in this document, it's a very, as Pius X says in Pascendi, modernists can say something that sounds Catholic, on one page of their work, and then the next page it's something of a rationalist. And they can redefine, they can use Catholic terms, but give them new heterodox meanings.
Which is the very thing that Vatican I says you can't do. And in fact, if we reflect again on that whole conflict with the death penalty, not that we want to bring it up in, in all its essentials, but one of the things they're saying is we have a new understanding of human dignity, and it is new. It's like the very words of Vatican I are, the dogmas of faith are to be understood in the sense in which the church has once declared them and can never be departed from, in the name of a new understanding,
right,
etc.
Right. And so the term that I have in mind that they're doing that with is evangelization itself, which ultimately if you're evangelizing someone, that means you're preaching the gospel in order to convert them to Christ and the Catholic Church. That's what evangelization is. Traditionally, like, that's what the term is supposed to communicate.
Right.
But that's not what it communicates in Evangelii Gaudium or the entire pontificate or magisterium of Francis. It basically means just sharing this vague sense of joy that you have as being a Christian. He specifically says in the document that evangelization is not proselytism.
Right.
He basically condemns proselytism in the document. He says it is not by proselytizing that the church grows, but by attraction. And actually, some people might be shocked to find out that he actually quotes Benedict XVI in that section. So,
well, yeah, because ultimately, too, I think maybe it's an analogy for what we're dealing with now, is that Benedict believed almost all the same things Francis believed. He just had better aesthetics and didn't actively hate, the growing minority in the church.
Right.
Or at least give the appearance, give him his due, give the appearance that he actively hates a growing minority of the church. I'm speaking of the late Holy Father.
Yeah.
So it's a similar thing with, here our current Holy Father believes all the same things. He's telling us that he believes all the same things Francis believed. But so far, anyway, he has nicer aesthetics. He's showing himself to be more circumspect and mild-mannered, and won't, come up with outrageous off-the-cuff statements that the Vatican press office has to kind of walk back, but not totally, just for him to repeat it again later. I guess if just to try to be fair to the late Holy Father, or to play the devil's advocate, and I've heard this said, I can't prove it, but it's possible he understands proselytism in a different sense, where in a sense of like a forced conversion, or forcing yourself in the other. And if you think in terms of like John Paul II personalism, you think of other, modern currents in philosophy, that's like a violence. It's like a bad thing. They don't understand it in terms, even though that's the category they understand it, even though that's not what proselytism.
And the original word doesn't have that. The
Mm-hmm.
original word doesn't have that violent connotation, does it? I mean,
Right.
because
No.
I remember in the Acts of the Apostles, it mentions proselytes, like Jewish people who have converted to the Jewish faith were called proselytes or something like that.
Although in Latin America, there is a tradition, the church is a state-run thing, also state-dominated thing. And that's another problem that might be factoring into it. And that there's a certain, like what seemed like an unseemly or undue persuasion by the state to force people to be Catholic at a certain time. I don't think that's certainly not the case anymore, but once upon a time. And so that, again, that could be, that doesn't mean it is, the framework where he was operating from. So which would make it, less destructive in terms of what he thinks personally, but the import, ultimately, it doesn't really matter, because that's what's going to be used. And then as soon as you go out trying to, convert people to the truth of the Catholic faith, well, Pope Francis says that's bad. Proselytism is bad. People are going to take that in the normal sense of that word as trying to make converts, trying to bring them into the truth.
Right, exactly. So a couple other concerning things about Evangelii Gaudium. So, like I say, he says proselytism is bad in there. He also says some things that are just outright false specifically in regard to Islam. This is a huge problem in the document, way down in you talked earlier. This document is so it's tediously long. I mean, it's a book. It's a thick book. I'm scrolling down to paragraph 253 to read what I wanted to here in this text. So that I'll put this up on the screen so people can see. And then we'll scroll up a little bit for the next section, what it has to say about the relationship with Judaism, which even goes further than Nostra Aetate, as we'll see in a moment. So this is what Francis says in Evangelii Gaudium regarding Islam. So he says, in order to sustain dialogue with Islam, suitable training is essential for all involved, not only so that they can be solidly and joyfully grounded in their own identity, but so that they can also acknowledge the values of others, appreciate the concerns underlying their demands, and shed light on shared beliefs. We Christians should embrace with affection and respect Muslim immigrants to our countries. How's that turned out over the last few years in Europe? In the same way that we hope and ask to be received and respected in countries of Islamic tradition. That's just never going to be a two-way street because of the nature of Islam. He goes on to say, I ask and humbly entreat those countries to grant Christians freedom to worship and to practice their faith in light of the freedom which followers of Islam enjoy in Western countries. Clearly, whoever wrote this document, I don't think it was literally Francis who penned this book.
No.
Clearly, they have no knowledge of the history or the doctrine of Islam. That's
No.
complete ignorance there.
Mhm.
But then it's even worse. It goes on to say, faced with disconcerting episodes of violent fundamentalism, our respect for true followers of Islam should lead us to avoid hateful generalizations. For authentic Islam and the proper reading of the Quran are opposed to every form of
The
violence.
Pope, who at least allegedly in his writers, his ghost writers, that they're going to tell us what the real Islam is, but not all the Islamic schools of fiqh, not the actual, the Quran itself, mind you, the abrogation principle, that the milder, more peaceful surahs that Muhammad gave in Mecca are abrogated by the warlike and violent surahs that he gave when he was in Medina, Yathrib, Medina. To forcibly convert, including forcibly convert the Jews, and when they didn't, he had them all executed. Right? That's,
Right.
I mean, they boasted this fact in the Sunnah. They and then you have the Al Hadith, which is a little more apocryphal, the traditions of the Prophet. Right?
Right.
It's like, Muhammad sends corpses and diseased bodies, Greek fire, into cities that wouldn't submit in Arabia.
Mhm.
And it was a hard fought thing unifying Arabia under Islam according to their own texts.
Right.
It's and then just the history of Islam. But again, you can go through all their schools of fiqh. Questions, may a true servant of Allah kill an infidel who relies on the Dar al-Ham, or sorry, the Dar al-Islam, the house of peace? It is in our own territory. Answer: yes. May a believer kill one of the al-Kitab, Jews and Christians, people of the book? Yes, unless the local, the Caliph or the local lord has positively forbade it for reasons, then he should obey the local law.
And unless they pay the jizya tax for
Well,
non-Muslims.
even if they do, they can still kill you. It's
That's,
in all their documentation that because you are not one of them, you have certain rights, and those rights are like customs. Essentially, you could pay the jizya, and the ruler could just change his mind, take all your property, and sell you into slavery just because he felt like it. Which did happen actually in Al-Andalus. It did happen in other places. So yeah, it's like you read that, and there's another thing too. So on the one hand, we're couching dialogue with Islam within religious terms, the ecumenical path set by Unitatis Redemptio in Nostra Aetate. We're squaring this in as something that's faith, and then a political thing. You must generally embrace these Muslim immigrants in your countries with affection, because that'll help with, well, he doesn't say it'll help with conversion. Oh, but it'll bring mutual respect, and I entreat those Islamic countries to allow Christians free practice their faith. Well, how's that working out? You have some places like Dubai,
yep.
which is given up a lot of its Muslim identity in favor of cash. Really, it's not that they're not Muslim. It's not that they don't still have mosques. It's that they don't care. They care about the dollars and the oil dollars and everything.
Right.
But at any minute, that could change on a dime, honestly. And then that's like the one out. That's like the exception that proves the rule. Go saying that I have human dignity and therefore the right to set up a church and pray in some of the Pashto regions in Afghanistan. Nope, you're going to die.
Well, even in Saudi Arabia, I don't think it's
Yeah.
legal to publicly profess the faith in Saudi Arabia or to worship freely.
No. Try Cairo, I mean, Iskandar, that is Alexandria.
Nigeria also comes to mind.
Yeah.
There's lots of jihad going on in Africa as well. So
yes. So
yeah,
that's it would, but and by organizations that were ultimately founded by Osama bin Laden back in the 90s.
So I think it's legitimate to ask Pope Leo, like, when you hold up, Holy Father, you've held up this document as the masterful roadmap for staying on the path of Vatican II. Do you agree with this nonsense? Like, do you agree with these false claims?
He just told us that he did.
Right. And then the other thing in this document I wanted to mention before I have a clip that I want to play, because we'll get to that in a moment, of Cardinal Prevost from last October at the Synod. But we'll scroll up a few paragraphs here. So all that was under the heading Interreligious Dialogue. Relations with Judaism has its own section. Here it's paragraphs 247 through
Uh-oh, you're trying to get me killed.
249. So 247, and this is where I said a moment ago, it actually goes further than, as far as I can recall anyway, it goes further than Nostra Aetate. So he says, we hold the Jewish people in special regard because their covenant with God has never been revoked. Now, as I recall, I'm surprised he doesn't have that in quotes or at least an allusion to John Paul II, because I think it was JP2 who famously said those words in a public
Yeah.
statement back in the
Well,
80s.
he did, and he cited Romans 11:29, and so then, which is, of course, that's another mess to deal with. But
Right.
then, but anyway, and it said John Paul II had cited that verse in Romans, and so here the author is merely repeating the exact same thing.
Right.
And yeah.
But even Nostra Aetate, the Vatican II Declaration on the Church's relationship with non-Christian religions, even that document, as bad as it is in some ways, didn't go as far to say that the old covenant has never been revoked.
Right. Yeah, it's a very problematic thing, because there's one sense in which it's true, because it wasn't revoked, it was fulfilled. Now, whoever read or heard in the annals of Judaism somebody that refused the covenant with Moses and the covenant with David and decided, no, I'm going back to the covenant with Abraham, I'm not doing this covenant. There are actually, they're called Samaritans. Did they, were they received by the Jews as brothers with a special relationship? No, they were considered heretics and ethnically unclean because they were forcibly interbred with the Assyrians. And
right.
So, they're not racially pure either. And so they were rejected by the Jews. And even in the first century, still hundreds of years of bad blood. Why? Well, because they refused to accept the covenant with Moses, the law, and the covenant with David, the kingdom. They accepted the covenant with Abraham. Well, it's like, because that covenant was fulfilled in the covenant that he gives to Moses. And again, brought in and fulfilled in the covenant with David is like two, things. And nobody's saying, well, I reject the covenant with David and only adhere to Moses. You adhere to both, right? Because they're complementary in that way, because it's just a fuller realization of the Mosaic law in terms of the Jewish kingdom. But then you get to Christ, I'm giving you a new and everlasting covenant in my blood, right? The blood that, just like you have, the blood in the covenant with Moses, right? Being sprinkled in the blood as he swear to uphold this covenant, become God's people. So we're covered in the blood of Christ. It's a type for baptism, where we're, mystically covered in the blood of Christ, right? And redeemed and washed from our state of original sin. So then we're brought into the new and everlasting covenant, and that's the thing. So it brings in elements of the old and fulfills those types. When has a covenant ever fulfilled a type? And then you could just take what came before it as if it didn't attack or contra, because the Jews rightly held the Samaritans' refusal to accept the Mosaic law as a rejection of the Mosaic law, the covenant that God himself made with his people. And thus, and Jesus told them, you told the woman at the well, you worship what you don't know. As in, in spite of, this being a generally positive exchange, he's still rebuking her and rebuking them for being heretics, essentially. Right. So I guess he wasn't synodal enough, to work with the Samaritans. But so that's why the whole phrase, it's such a canard. The old covenant wasn't revoked, it was fulfilled. And the fact is, the Jews, as they are after the temple's destruction, are incapable of upholding God's honor, of upholding the covenant, because they don't have a temple, they don't have a priesthood. They can't do the things God demanded of them in the Old Testament.
Right, exactly. And another, I guess, very controversial verse that comes to mind from all, and I suppose a lot of people would consider this anti-Semitic, but then they're calling, it comes from
Gospel
St.
itself
Paul.
is anti-Semitic to some people, so in the fathers and
right. Let me see if I can find this. I forget. I think it's in First Thessalonians, if I remember correctly, chapter 2. Let's see here. Here we go. Yes. So this is from St. Paul. He's saying, this is First Thessalonians chapter 2, starting on verse 14. For you, brethren, are become followers of the churches of God, which are in Judea, in Christ Jesus. For you also have suffered the same things from your own countrymen, even as they have from the Jews, who both killed the Lord Jesus and the prophets, and have persecuted us, and please not God, and are adversaries to all men. So that doesn't sound like St. Paul would agree that the covenant has not been revoked, in the sense that it's still valid for them. I mean, it's just like this language reminds me of the prayers for Good Friday in the New Rite, which basically talks about praying for the Jews in the sense of that they uphold that they're faithful to their covenant with God. Well, hold on a minute. St. Paul says that's obsolete now. Because we have a new covenant. So again, a question for His Holiness: do you agree with all of this? And the answer at this point seems to be yes, because 9 days after he gave this speech in which he was praising Vatican II and praising Evangelii Gaudium, that was on May 10th.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward 9 days to May 19th, and he had an interreligious meeting at the Vatican. You know, as always happens with new popes, everybody in the world wants to come meet him, all the dignitaries, whatever. So he had this meeting with representatives of other churches and ecclesial communities. So basically, that means Orthodox and Protestants in plain language, and other religions. And this is from his address. I'll quote a little bit from it. One of the strong emphases of Pope Francis's pontificate was that of universal fraternity. So again, another theme that I've noticed: he praises Pope Francis uh, in almost every public address that he gives. So again, did I lose Ryan? You still
Nope,
there?
I'm still
Oh, you're
here.
still there. Okay, cool. Um, so he's very clear that he obviously is fond of Francis. He makes a point of praising him in almost every address that he gives, as far as from what I've been following. Maybe not literally every one, but several times. I mean, also he's on, I think, at least two occasions now affirmed positively that Francis is in heaven, which, short of a canonization, we don't know that. Um, so,
Mm-hmm.
so it's pretty clear that he's a big fan of Francis. So in
Mm-hmm.
this address, he goes on to say, this is again May 19th. One of the strong emphases of Pope Francis's pontificate was that of universal fraternity. In this regard, the Holy Spirit really urged him to advance with great strides the initiatives already undertaken by previous pontiffs, especially since Saint John XXIII. So again, he's seeing continuity between Francis and Vatican II and all the predecessors, not a radical break. He goes on, the Pope of Fratelli Tutti promoted both the ecumenical path and interreligious dialogue. Fratelli Tutti has a whole other laundry list of problems. He did so above all by cultivating interpersonal relations in such a way that, without taking anything away from ecclesial bonds, the human trait of the encounter was always valued. May God help us to treasure his witness, to treasure the witness of Pope Francis.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what
When,
was the wit?
there's also an article I sent you in Spanish from El País,
Yeah, let me put
where
that up there.
he's meeting with people when he was the bishop in how do you say this city? I can't remember off the top of my head. Chicleo.
Yes.
And as he's meeting with the people, he's telling him what we need for the church, and it says,
Yeah, I'll scroll
you know,
down to that. So I have Google Translate turned on.
yeah, so
He's,
I've got the original. Quiero sacerdotes como el Papa Francisco. I'm sorry,
yep.
I can read Spanish well enough. I can't really speak it, but I want priests like Pope Francis. That's what we had. He's telling the people. That's what we have to. If you got the translate on, you could read the full quote in
Yeah,
context.
here we go. When he was appointed bishop in Chiclalo, Prevost visited the diocese's parishes one by one to tell his team what he wanted and ask what they needed. And just to be fair, I mean, I read this full article, and it sounds like he did do some heroic things down there, as far as like really putting on his work boots and doing the work and not just sitting in the chancery and delegating to other people. He was getting his hands dirty, so to speak, in a good sense. But this goes on to say, with the parish priest of Iyimo, he was very clear. I want priests like Pope Francis, says Father Felix Fiestas, who heads this small town, population 3,000, north of the capital, famous for its terrible floods. He told us that we had to accompany the people in their suffering and help them with whatever we could, unless they want the traditional Latin Mass, of course.
Yeah. Then no accompanying.
He was a very humane bishop. He put himself in the people's shoes. He came here many times to help us with the water. So, like I said, I think I'm sure he did a lot of good there. My concern is that he's very much aligned with Francis doctrinally, which is kind of the purpose of this episode, is to take a sober look at that and express some legitimate concern about that. So, and this even extends to the issue, to the controversial topic of synodality. And first I want to play the clip that you sent over. I think he's speaking Spanish, but it has subtitles, and then we can play the clip that I prepared. So you want to introduce this one? I don't know the full background, but he's giving some kind of an address at a graduation.
An address at a university, and he's wearing a cap that looks kind of odd. It's apparently a Latin American academic cap that originates from the Spanish in the 18th century or something of that sort. What I asked somebody who's more knowledgeable about those sorts of things, and just to get my facts straight on it. So, because heck if I know. So I did understand him in the original, but the translation is accurate. So he's giving remarks on this address and referencing, why you got to be more like Pope Francis. Go ahead.
All right, here we go.
Hay división entre cristianos. Hay personas, por ejemplo, en la iglesia que critican duramente al Santo Padre o algunos obispos o algunas situaciones. Personas que rechazan sus enseñanzas, que buscan dividir. Solo mirando a los blogs, a las entrevistas en estos últimos meses, antes, durante y la conclusión del mes del sínodo sobre la sinodalidad, han sido publicadas falsas noticias, distorsiones, hasta teorías, conspiraciones, interpretaciones erradas sobre tantas hermosas experiencias que vivimos durante el sínodo.
So just quick side note. So obviously he's speaking sometime after the synod ended last October, and he's saying basically, there are people distorting and criticizing the beautiful experiences we had during the synod. So he obviously thought the synod was a good thing. I think that's actually the end of the video now that I think about it. So that's pretty revealing remarks right there, I think.
Absolutely, 100%. But it really shows, like, anytime you're looking at the synod, it's like, what the heck is the synod on synodality? Good grief. I pilloried that and joked to like a Dilbert cartoon. Don't rush into a meeting without having a pre-meeting, and then a few steps later, you get the pointy-haired boss gets the idea, and then he goes in and saying, we're going to have our pre-meeting, right? And then one of the engineers looks at Dilbert and says, "You think you're funny, but you're not." And so here's synod on synodality. It's like, good grief, we're going to have a synod. We've been doing synods for a while, but now you're gonna have a synod on the whole process of having a synod, right? Or something. I don't know. It just gets kind of kookier, but it's like, but you saw all these very heterodox statements being made in the synod of synodality that just on their face were heterodox, from bishops, from other speakers. You have like the one of the biggest homosexual apologists in the clergy, made a cardinal, Timothy Radcliffe. He was there, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Talking about these sorts of things, and he's talking about this as a beautiful experience. And there's these conspiracy theories, los blogs, i.e., the Remnant, Rotticelli, Taylor Marshall, I guess.
Yep.
It's and I think that all of this anyway allows us to surmise that properly, that he believes, like Benedict, frankly, he believes all the same things that Francis believes. And he just so far is demonstrating, better aesthetics and better appreciation for, certain aspects, like he gets the cardinals and says, "Oh, it's good to pray in Latin. That address you read." He introduces it. Let's pray our Father in the Hail Mary in Latin. And then that's not completely out of the norm. John Paul II did the same thing. His picking Leo. Everyone's like, "Oh wow, nice. Oh, this is not John Paul III or Francis II or Paul VII or something like that." And it's like, well, you got to remember, if either you've been in trad circles long enough where you don't remember in the New Rite, or you didn't run or have friends and acquaintances who are exclusively in the New Rite and whatnot, they do have an appreciation for pre-Vatican II popes. They do, pay attention at least to some of their teachings, and they might not just see the totality, how some of the things, like especially Pascendi, applies to things now, right? They haven't got there yet, but they have an appreciation for earlier popes. So it's not an indication of a traditional direction, because he opts for, say, Leo, who, especially if you love Catholic social teaching, everyone knows Leo XIII is the first real magisterial iteration of it. Although really you could argue Pius IX, but he's the first magisterial iteration of it, in like a form, carrying on from Toporelli and other pioneers of it in the 19th century. So, it's not anything particularly new. It's applying the moral teachings of the church to new things, to the revolutionary situations the church finds herself in the 19th century. And so that speaks to people in if you're in the New Rite and you're looking into social justice and you read Leo XIII's encyclicals, and that could inspire. So that's why you'd pick, and he says as much, that's why he picks the name Leo. And and so it is just because he's not getting a John or a Paul or a Francis doesn't mean that all of a sudden now he's traditional. And I think there's a good bit of hopium, which is understandable after a period where you didn't have any power, and you see with Francis things so catastrophically bad in so many different ways in terms of Orthodox doctrine, faith, and devotion.
But I think people may have forgotten that the crisis didn't begin with Francis. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people have come to think in those terms. That the crisis in the church began with Francis, which is unfortunately not the case.
Well, you see that people have come to that, and whether that's people coming at the Benedictist position, for example, that's been interesting. I won't address that here, but and of course they don't like me very much because my 1 Peter 5 article, and that's still they can't stand it. But if you follow a fellow named O'Reilly on Twitter, he's got a blog or website, Roma Locuta Est.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
He actually took the time to find what the big proponents have been saying since Leo was elected. But they start picking up what are kind of historic sedevacantist positions or other positions, and it's but they're still celebrating the New Rite. They still go to the New Rite. Many of them, some are trad, some are let's reset to Benedict, as if Francis is where all the problems start. It's kind of funny that way. But there were a lot of people, though, in the Novus Ordo that started taking a look when, under Francis's pontificate at different things. And some ended up going trad or being convinced where they never would have looked at it otherwise. We had the spectacle of Joseph Seifert, who is one of the big gurus in phenomenology and John Paul II's personalism, published in international journals, big figure at one of the founding members of the Pontifical Academy for Life, big figure, intellectually speaking, during the pontificate of John Paul II. And he was out there prior to the conclave writing a letter to Monsignor Baptista Rey, saying, hey, we need to look at all the stuff Vigano is talking about. I mean, who could have imagined that 20, 30 years ago? It's crazy to even, think about that.
Right.
But anytime you're in a position with both trads and, more conservative, folks in the Novus Ordo, that you have this period, you're just seeing more go on. You don't even know how to address it. You don't even know what to say. It's like, wow, how do we even reconcile this? And especially the death penalty stuff, especially with fiducia supplicans and Mores Laetitia and all this business. And you're just like, how do we even reconcile this with the Catholic faith at this point? And you have no power in it. Everything just seems to be going worse. And now you get a pope, and he does his first mass Novus Ordo in Latin. The blessing, the prayers, Francis did that in Latin too, by the way, because it's open for him. And Leo definitely has a better command of it. I don't know if he knows how fluent he is in Latin, but at least his pronunciation of it, he only missed one or two stresses. So it's like, so he's obviously accustomed to it, and it's so everyone looks at that and it kind of creates this hopium. Oh, we need, because when you've been in a position where you have no power, you have no advocate for you in the hierarchy as a trad or even as conservative in the Novus Ordo. And then, oh, look, hope. And I kind of compare it to under when Trump came into power and he had QAnon, right? And you had incredibly implausible things, and then there's these sealed indictments, and which was shown to be absolutely fake. And people bought into it. And I was actually talking to one fellow who was a libertarian who's against government overreach, who he had to stop and second guess himself when he's on all the QAnon blogs. Like, and when Biden became president, he said, we need to stop I don't know if you're allowed to say that on YouTube still, but we need to stop the, other S word. And that rhymes with deal. And
oh yeah.
We need martial law to stop. And then he stopped and he thought about it. He's like, wait a minute, martial law? If anyone called for that under Obama, I would have freaked out. But here I am, almost to the point where I'm ready to do that because of this. And he started taking a second look at it, and kind of the scales fell from his eyes, and he realized how ridiculous it was.
Right.
He was so hopeful, so terribly hopeful. Yes. That we do have a savior. We have someone, because after 8 years of Obama, and you don't have any power, you don't have any advocates in the government, and now you see this change. Like, wow, he's fighting the deep state. He's going to do this, and then nothing of the sort. We see what happened during we're allowed to say COVID now. Yeah, I've said it before.
I think we are.
Yeah. Senator COVID and such, and so it's one thing to be cautiously optimistic. And be hopeful. Let's see what he does. Give him a chance. Not come out and start bashing him every second you get. But that doesn't mean you can't point to the things that we've spoken of tonight, right. and say, there is a problem here. And he's basically telling us, meet the new boss, same as the old boss, except he's got a better suit on.
Yeah. Yeah, and bringing it kind of back to the issue of synodality, which is what we were talking about a few moments ago. I mean, even in his very first Urbi et Orbi address, before he gave his blessing in Latin, and some people did note this. I remember Father Dave Nix mentioned this, and I think Liz Yore, maybe some others picked up on this. He said, we want to be a synodal church. And at first I thought, well, I didn't get too anxious about it at first, but then when I've started doing a little more digging into his positions on synodality and things, and I have a clip to play from a press conference from last October, kind of does sound like he is pretty on board with synodality. I mean, I'll play these clips and we can discuss them. I guess people can decide for themselves, but so there are he's responding to two questions in these clips. One is about, if synodality can successfully resolve the tensions in the church. And it's interesting that he says, as part of his answer, we shouldn't look to synodality to provide answers to concrete questions. It's very Francis-like language, that the process is more important than the destination, so to speak. And then he's also in the other one, as people will see, he's given an opportunity to speak against fiducia supplicans, and he doesn't take the opportunity. So let's take a look at these.
In this period, there are tensions, a certain degree of polarization. Do you think that the synod and the way of working of the synod is helping to overcome or to soften these tensions, this polarization? And where do you see the good signs? Thank you.
I think that the tensions and polarization that we experience within the church is also a reflection of what we experience in many different societies today. Culture, social realities oftentimes have a huge impact on the way we live our lives, including within the church. That, on the one hand, should give us a certain perspective, which is important. In terms of the synod itself, because some of the issues which perhaps are within the overall picture causing some of these tensions, and that those topics have been removed from the work of the synod and given over to these various different study groups.
So just real quick, what is he talking about there, practically speaking? Two issues in particular, the female diaconate and the status of sodomy, basically homosexuality, whether or not it's still a sin, which is a ridiculous question, of course. Both are. So keep that in mind with the rest of his answer.
Right.
I don't think we should expect instant solutions, so to speak, that would respond to some of the questions that would be raised when we speak about tensions or polarization. On the other hand, I think it's very important to understand that at least a large part of what the Synod is about a spirituality, about a process of conversion, about a new way of doing things within the church.
So again, what does conversion mean to him and to these people at the Synod? It doesn't mean conversion to the Catholic faith. It means changing the way that we do things in the church. That's what conversion means to them.
Converting into this overarching religion of synodality, essentially, which is everything and also nothing at the same time. You know, it's analogous to like what's one of the biggest problems with climate change theory, because it seeks to explain everything. And as Karl Popper notes, and any theory for a scientific event that the more it tries to explain everything, the more it actually explains nothing, because it becomes unfalsifiable. It has no test. And theology is a science. Any doctrine that you propose as part of the Depositum Fidei, it has to be tested to show that that is the case. And sometimes that's done by theologians and merely as common assent. And it might be raised by the magisterium. It might become infallible through constant witness of either the fathers or the theologians, et cetera, et cetera. And but at the same time, if you have this kind of overarching doctrine, who has ever defined what synodality is? Not Pope Francis, not any of the major figures at the synod. It's just this overarching thing we all need to convert ourselves to and commit to, but we don't know what it is. And it's going to solve all the world's problems. Just you can't do it right away, but eventually it will. It's going to do this and it's going to do that. It's going to help the evangelization. It's going to help this, but well, how? It's going to fix all these things, but we don't even know what it is, right? Much like climate change, which is always morphing, and it's always the human emissions, which count for like 0.2% of all emissions on the planet. Those are the ones, and not all the natural ones.
All right, so here we'll finish this clip here.
That offers to all of us a kind of vehicle, if you will.
I'll rewind it just a little bit so we can get the
context.
About
a spirituality, about a process of conversion, about a new way of doing things within the church that offers to all of us a kind of vehicle, if you will, that hopefully will provide a means by which we can sit down together, speak to one another in dialogue and not with violence or hatred, and search for ways of overcoming the tensions or the divisions that may exist within the church or beyond the church. The Synod, therefore, I would say, is not about giving specific answers to concrete questions, but much rather about...
So just, did everybody hear that? I'm going to play that again because I think that's really significant.
Synod, therefore, I would say, is not about giving specific answers to concrete questions, but much rather about a whole process of conversion within the church that hopefully will lead us to a more positive way of responding to the challenges that cause these apparent tensions, this polarization, which in fact do exist.
But in order to resolve these tensions, it is precisely direct answers that we need. Specifically, we need the Pope to say definitively, it is impossible to ordain women as deacons because it's part of the sacrament of holy orders and they are not valid matter for the sacrament, number one. And number two, homosexual acts, sodomy, is still intrinsically evil and gravely sinful. That's that simple. So it's disturbing to me that he doesn't think that the purpose of the Synod is to give answers to those concrete things, because that's exactly what we need from a real Synod. All right, so let me finish. We'll listen to the rest of this clip, and then we'll get back to.
But the Instrumentum Laboris
Ryan.
for the Synod discusses giving doctrinal authority to
And just to let me back it up a little bit and just explain. So this next question from a journalist is regarding fiducia supplicans and the notion that the synod wanted to give, what Francis calls in Evangelii Gaudium genuine doctrinal authority to episcopal conferences. So that's the context of this question.
That cause these apparent tensions, this polarization, which in fact do exist.
But the Instrumentum Laboris for the Synod discusses giving doctrinal authority to episcopal conferences, and I understand that may refer to allowing bishop conferences to further determine how to apply doctrine in their territories. My question is, when we see bishops' conference, a bishops' conference or several bishops' conferences opt out of embracing a magisterial teaching, so to speak, such as we saw from several bishops' conferences with fiducia supplicans, does that set a precedent for fracturing the church's unity, or is that just synodality at work, and is that what we can expect from a synodal church moving forward? Thank you.
One of the specific things that happened within the synod is that we discovered that there's a difference of translation. The English makes it sound as if the episcopal conferences have, if you will, a specific doctrinal authority without defining what that is. The Italian and the Spanish, the Italian expression is qualche autorità dottrinale. Those of you who know Italian, qualche autorità has a very different meaning than a specific authority and doctrine. Because of that, in the first place, there was a lot of discussion in the Synod Hall on this point. And I think that while some of that was cleared up, we actually found that in the official translations in English of the respective documents, because the Instrumentum Laboris was quoting Evangelii Gaudium, which was quoting a previous document, and it goes all the way back to Vatican II.
So I want to pause there for just a moment, because from what I can see, that's not quite an accurate description of what's going on here with the working document for the synod. I want to highlight for you from Evangelii Gaudium what he's talking about. It's from paragraph 32, and it is talking about giving genuine doctrinal authority to episcopal conferences. So let me share this quickly. I'll take this off for just a moment and put up this other tab here. All right. So Cardinal Prevost was saying that there was some confusion in the synod because of a translation issue, or that they were drawing from this paragraph from Evangelii Gaudium, paragraph 32, and that was itself quoting something else, but actually it's not. There is a reference here to, but it's not a direct quote. It's something that John Paul II wrote, but it's like a citation, but it's not a direct quote. So let me go back to what this says here. So this is what he's talking about. The Second Vatican Council stated that, like the ancient patriarchal churches, episcopal conferences are in a position, quote, to contribute in many and fruitful ways to the concrete realization of the collegial spirit. And that's a quote from Lumen Gentium, paragraph 23. But Francis goes on in Evangelii Gaudium, yet this desire has not been fully realized, since a juridical status of episcopal conferences, which would see them subjects of specific attributions, including genuine doctrinal authority, has not yet been sufficiently elaborated. And that's one thing that they were hoping to ram through the synod on synodality, was basically saying that fracturing the church into, if one episcopal conference wants it this way, doctrinally, fine. The Germans can do their thing, the French can do their thing, whatever. It would destroy the mark of unity of the church, which is one holy Catholic and apostolic. It would destroy the unity. So that's kind of the context of what he's talking about in this.
It's almost like Gallicanism, the way you've expressed it there, is that from that, the French do their thing. Doctrine is one thing in France, it's one thing in Germany, it's one thing in England. It's right. that Gallicanism. Yeah, we're part of the Catholic. The Gallicans argue we're part of the Catholic Church, and but we have to make doctrine here, and so we'll have a different doctrine than you have, and that's what the Gallicans were really pushing.
Mm-hmm.
back in the day. And you even see a similar thing where Charles V is tempted for a while to have that kind of solution to the Lutheran crisis after the Augsburg Colloquy, to try to set, especially if he gets frustrated, he and Paul III get at loggerheads various times. And, the council ends up falling apart in its first period because of the fact that Paul III was nervous about Charles V being all powerful. Last that time that happened, he was stuck in the Castel Sant'Angelo watching Charles V's mutinous troops completely destroy Rome in the Sacco di Roma in 1527. So they get loggerheads, and Charles is tempted by this idea. He never ends up going for it, of course. But, we'll all reckon, I don't need the council. I can do this on my own. And we'll have a Catholic Church in Germany, and we'll have another Catholic Church in Germany that's basically Lutheran, where we're both Catholic, and then their sections believe this and we believe this, and that'll settle the strife, and that'll settle the political strife. And that's the angle that he starts to take. Eventually he does abandon that idea, but it sounds like that's what's being brought out again. Oh, well, it's too harsh to reimpose this foreign ecclesiology that persisted for 1965 years. Let's instead introduce a new one where we don't have to have these rancorous things. Each country can believe as it wants, and they can set these things, and then you have the collegiality aspect. See, we don't need a top-down thing from Rome. Each conference can set its own thing. So in France, you can do homosexual marriage, but in and in Africa you can't. And all Catholic, all expressions of the same one faith, and rito unico, the sole right of the Latin Church and all that business.
Right. And I think the rest of his answer is very revealing, because this is in the context of a journalist asking about fiducia supplicans, and let's listen to the rest of what he has to say here.
Yeah.
The interpretation that would have to be given to that is much closer to what we heard in the expression, the explanation from Father Routier, when he spoke about what that is really about. Bishops' conferences are called to teach. Now, in the case which you bring up in terms of how one or the other bishops' conferences may have decided to approach any document, but in this case, fiducia supplicans, the bishops in the Episcopal conferences of Africa were basically saying that here in Africa, our whole cultural reality is very different, so that this document, it wasn't saying rejecting the teaching authority of Rome, it was saying that our cultural situation is such that the application of this document is just not going to work. You have to remember there's still places in Africa that apply the death penalty, for example, for people who are living in homosexual relationship, things like that. So we're in very different worlds, and those kinds of differences are one of the reasons, as was explained to us a few minutes ago, of why each Episcopal conference needs to have a certain authority in terms of saying, how are we going to understand this in the concrete reality in which we're living?
That last phrase totally the concrete realities, that totally reminds me of Amoris Laetitia. It's the exact same language, like the concrete complexities, I think is the phrase.
Right. We have concrete answers, but we do have concrete perplexities. We don't have, and the thing is, I mean, it's true enough that you can have a disciplinary situation on some matter that a solution will work in one church and not another on disciplinary things. And that's something that, the universal authority of the church, is empowered to actually do and manage and take care of, right? And whereas like in the Old Testament, it was one law, one full discipline for one people, one in the true sense of populus, as you find it in populus, as you find it in Cicero or someone, not populus, because populus is a popular tree. Populus, you do get in the universal church, you have different peoples that might require a different situation. The church tolerated certain things historically, such as like for the the Galatians and the Quattordecimans. So for a time, the church tolerated a diversity in the celebration of Easter because it was seen that it was necessary for just the good order there. You couldn't do that elsewhere. And eventually, once the need for that went away, then those tolerances also went away, and everything gets unified under how we do Easter now, right? And so you can have disciplinary things like that in theory don't work. But here with fiducia supplicans, we're not just talking about a mere disciplinary thing. We're talking about a moral application of the church that has moral considerations that are universal, wherever they're done. It doesn't matter if you're doing it in the Netherlands or in Germany, or if you're doing it in Nigeria.
Right.
It has the same import, morally speaking.
Right.
And
yeah, it's immoral, it's sinful basically to bless a same-sex couple who
as a
couple, regardless of where you are. It doesn't change from place to place, obviously.
Yeah, because they weren't wrong when they said, "Oh yeah, you can bless anybody, and you can you can bless anything you want." Technically speaking, but what's the point of a blessing? To beg God to to impart His grace and this person for whatever. And so if someone homosexual comes and he's homosexual and he asks you for a blessing, it's just by himself. Maybe it's going to be beneficial for him to turn from that way of life, or to begin working on trying to fix that, whatever problems he's got in his life. Fine. That doesn't really create any particular scandal to do that. When they come as a couple, because like a husband, a man and a woman come together, they're not married. They want a blessing. Why do you two want a blessing as a couple? Well, what does it look like to anyone? Because this is a natural law thing.
Right.
Any society whatsoever, it looks like you're blessing them in a non-married relationship. That's what it looks like, because the outward sign suggests that. And you could pivot with all kinds of Jesuitry that you want to do to get around that. But the fact is, that's what you're doing. And it's universal because it's a natural law question.
Right. And notice in his answer, I just wanted to point out in his answer, notice that he didn't say that the African bishops were objecting on moral grounds, which I think they were. He's putting it in terms of, well, just culturally, it would be problematic culturally. What's problematic morally? That's the point.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think the African I know one in particular, because I spoke with him at the Catholic Identity Conference last October. Shortly, I think probably shortly before that press conference, actually, or shortly after, one or the other. Can't remember the dates. But I know it wasn't just a matter of like, culturally it was going to be difficult. Like, he understood that it's immoral. That was the main reason that he objected to it. So so I think hearing those kinds of things from then Cardinal Prevost give us some insight into where he stands on things, despite other positive things he said and done. And as far as negative things that he's done so far, he hasn't really done a whole lot so far, as like appointments and things, although he has appointed as secretary to the dicastery for religion, I forget the full title, but basically for religious life, a as you said during the rundown recently, a pantsuited nun who doesn't wear a head covering or habit or anything.
Apparently they have like a habit that's some modified type of dress. They don't really know.
Okay. And so he's done, that's obviously concerning. He's also, as various outlets have reported, confirmed as Bishop of St. Gallen, the infamous St. Gallen, the origin of the St. Gallen Mafia, that diocese.
Right.
A bishop who is favorable to the ordination of women and also to LGBTQ stuff. So, and that's, talk about one of the Pope's main duties should be really, and this is what Bishop Schneider emphasized when I interviewed him a couple weeks ago. Like, Bishop Schneider got very serious and very adamant that Pope Leo really needs to devote himself to the appointment of good, holy men of God as bishops. I don't think most people understand the crucial nature of that part of being the Pope.
Right. Well, interestingly enough, St. Robert Bellarmine, actually, when he was made a cardinal very much against his will. He did not want to be a cardinal. He was convinced he'd lose his soul if he became a cardinal. And he did everything possible. And he was checking with Baronius, who knew to be very saintly, and went through the exact same thing himself. And, is this too much? Do I have too much? Because it seems like the minimum I need to do this, right? So he's very attentive to all these things.
Right.
During the controversy between the Dominicans and the Jesuits on grace, he seemed to be too public a critic, and Clement wanted him out of the papal court because this wasn't good to have him there with someone of his prestige demurring from the position he'd already decided he wanted to go on. So he decides to banish Bellarmine by making him a bishop. And Bellarmine was gone instantly, just departed from all discussion on that subject, just devoted himself to being a bishop. And Clement was like, I didn't actually want him to go, and he still wanted him around for his advice. So then he writes to him and says, I want you to give me a memorial, a testament, all the problems in the church and how to fix it. And he starts it out by saying that since you have ordered me thus, Holy Father, I will answer that I pity no man in the world more than the Supreme Pontiff, because if he shall appoint bad bishops, and those bad bishops will appoint bad priests, the blood of souls that are lost through that will be required at his hands. Whereas if he promotes good men to the episcopacy, and they appoint good priests, ordain good priests, then he'll be acquitted in terms of his duty. And this has renderings of Ezekiel. If you preach to the unbeliever,
right, the watchman,
blood will be required at your hands, right? And he's using that kind of language. This is serious business. He's telling the Pope, if you appoint bad bishops, you're going to go to hell. And you know what Clement VIII's response is? Well, Christ did have Judas.
Wow.
As if that's an answer, as if Christ in the whole mystery of salvation history, something that's prophecy that is supposed to happen, and he foreknows it's going to happen. He points because it's necessary for salvation history, not because that's the way the church is supposed to work.
Wow.
It's like,
right, and that's kind of like it. And people now are making excuses like, well, St. Gallen has this special agreement or concordat, yada yada yada, and the Pope doesn't want to infringe on that. Come on, that's not a valid excuse.
You're the Pope. What's going on there? You take control of your church, and of course, I mean, there's all these other forces, and who knows if maybe he's biding his time and then getting his ducks in a row, and he'll do it later when it's more, able to be more lasting. That's theoretically possible, but we're not seeing anything that indicates that that's the direction he's going to go in. Or again, he said the Novus Ordo in Latin. And he's, shown, a favorableness like prayers in Latin and things like that. Okay, that's nice. What's he getting? This will be telling, I think, what he does about Charlotte, where we just saw it, because it's making the news. And I guarantee you that the social media managers of the Vatican have seen that and advised him on that. Right. And I can guarantee, well, I shouldn't say I can guarantee you. My prediction is absolutely nothing will be done about it, in spite of how unjust it's so unjust that the Novus Ordo priests are saying, hey, well, these problems that are in Traditionis Custodes, they are not in our parishes where we say the traditional Latin Mass. Now, whatever you think about that, and the Novus Ordo generally, whatever, doesn't matter. The priests themselves who are saying Mass there, they also say the Novus Ordo, they want to be good and obedient. They wrote the bishop and said, this just seems like an unjust solution for our people. Bishop totally ignored it and issued talking points, said, oh, well, if some people leave the church, wait a minute, that just seems contrary to everything we read about sharing the joy of the gospel, synodality, allowing others to preach to us, you would think, being informed by others. Basically, again, everybody but traditionalists will go to the peripheries, but not those peripheries.
Exactly. I did a long stream earlier today, actually, on that subject of what's going on in Charlotte. I remember those. We covered the talking points in detail. So. Right. And then there's also the issue of I think Rorate Celi was the one who reported on this, that there are some French bishops who apparently are keen on shutting down the Latin Mass for the Chartres pilgrims later this month. All right, well, no, I guess next month. Pentecost is in June this month. That Chartres pilgrimage is always around the Feast of Pentecost. So will Leo intervene there if they want to move forward with that and try to shut down the largest.
Bishop Martin in Charlotte was, who managed that appointment? Well, Prevost did as head of the Congregation for Bishops.
Right.
So he knows who this man is. He was the one who would have taken the work from the nuncio and appointed him. And, it doesn't seem, he knows what kind of, man he is. And again, he says he wants more priests like Pope Francis. He's, hasn't said anything about Traditionis Custodes, but it's on the other hand, he's on track with the program of Francis's pontificate. So whatever nice things he said about Latin, that only applies to the Novus Ordo. I would not be surprised if he saw some kind of offering from the Bishop of Charlotte. Well, you can have a Novus Ordo Latin Mass, and then pillory even further those who don't go to it. Oh, see, they have a schismatic mind, they won't go to that. Where I can tell you, I dislike the Novus Ordo in Latin even more than I do in English. And there's reasons, and I know for people who would give their left arm to have like a mass that looked reverent and go to Novus Ordo in Latin. I'm not telling you don't go, I'm not telling you can't go, just my own personal thing with that. It's what got me out finally to just only doing the traditional mass or the Byzantine Divine Liturgy, because I just cannot tell you, like I say, it's worse in Latin than it is in English in so many different ways, apart from any chants or things that have carried over from the tradition.
Right. All right. Well, we've been going for about an hour and a half. I don't want to keep you too long, and I gotta get off myself and get ready for the work, the day's work tomorrow. But I wanted to quote. Maybe this can be a good conclusion. So he gave an address to the. Leo gave an address on Friday, May 16th, to the members of the diplomatic corps who are accredited to the Holy See, and he said the following. He focused on a few different words, one of which was the word truth. And he said, for her part, the church can never be exempted from speaking the truth about humanity and the world. I wish he would have added the truth revealed by God. That's primarily the church's mission, not so much about humanity and the world.
Charitable and assume he meant that.
Right. Resorting whenever necessary to blunt language that may initially create misunderstanding. So I think that kind of provides, in his own words, justification for what we're doing tonight. Like I think we are, according to Leo himself, we are supposed to be speaking the truth, even using blunt language if necessary. Now, he does go on to say, yet truth can never be separated from charity, and we obviously agree with that, which he says always has at its root a concern for the life and well-being of every man and woman. And that's ultimately why we're speaking up. We're speaking up, saying the truth that we have tonight, out of charity, out of fraternal charity towards him and fraternal charity towards others, because we don't want people to kind of go back to sleep, as many people were during Benedict's reign, thinking that everything was wonderful and he was getting everything back on track, when that really was not the case. In many ways.
So it's actually worse than with John Paul II, because Benedict was actually a theologian, whereas John Paul is more of a philosopher / actor, whatever. So he wasn't always precise and didn't always worry about being precise. And he was also very verbose. And I remember the commentary of Garrigou Lagrange when he refused, Karol Wojtyła a doctorate. And he said, writes much, says little. And that was Garrigou Lagrange's note on Karol Wojtyła.
Wow.
So when he was his teacher. But
so in 21st century language, we would say that he pretty much roasted Karol Wojtyła.
Yeah, whatever, or he ratioed it, or I don't know, whatever the terms are. I can't keep up with it, but it was more clear when Benedict would say things that were problematic, because they really were problematic. And it's like Benedict does in Assisi, he does all these same things, and we're on the same path. We haven't left it, and it does not seem that the current Holy Father is going to leave it either. So, and I think that it's good for people to keep that in mind. Again, watch what he does, as he goes forward. Obviously we want to give him a chance, but we also want to be realistic about what that's going to look like.
Yes.
And not jump on the, like clapping seals for every time you put some traditional vestment or something.
Yes, that's exactly right. Well, I think we want to leave you with a humorous a conclusion. So Ryan provided this video clip. Do you want to just? I don't know. It's from The View. Is that it?
The View. It's they don't know anything about it. It's like it's crazy. These liberal women basically pontificating on all issues that they think that they have the right to pontificate on, with or without knowledge. Usually without. Usually it's ab ignorantia instead of ad ignorantiam. But anyway, so they're talking about the election of the Pope, and of course take it in the very characteristic way you would expect them to take it.
There we go.
Turns out our new American Pope has Haitian and Black roots. So we actually have a Black Pope. Apparently apparently, it's like
is Papa
chef's kiss
Migrum.
for me. So apparently, both of his maternal grandparents are described as Black, Haitian, or mulatto in several census documents. And on their marriage license, the grandfather's birth place is Haiti, listed as Haiti. Her birthplace is listed as born in New Orleans. They were identified as people of color, but in 1920, when they migrated to Chicago, the census reflected their race as white.
So I'm loving everything
So
about
I'm loving.
this Pope.
I'm
Let me
really.
tell you.
That's your poll quote.
Wow. So seriously, what they're concerned about is like all this DEI crap.
Well, yeah, exactly. And it goes back to intersectionality. It goes back to all these, frankly, asinine things that, yeah. And the whole push for immigrants, migrants, more migrants is like, why doesn't the church look to improving conditions in those countries so people don't feel the need to leave, especially all these 20 to 25-year-old men with dubious civil records and things of this sort that are all coming over for some reason, but not families, definitely not Christians in Middle Eastern countries, definitely not them. It's intersectionality, right? It's more of this communist stuff, and intersectionality, if people aren't familiar with that, it's another phase of Marxist, race politics, where this group has been abused more over time in history. So therefore, their descendants now may or may not have suffered any kind of abuse like that. They're more entitled to things than a group that historically might have been the oppressors, regardless of whether these instances of these people did any kind of oppressing or whatever else, colonialism or whatever. And so white people can never be victims of racism, according to intersectionality. And you've seen that where they talk about it. Well, yeah, the black people out there, we hate white people. We want to kill white people. All these Marxists, right, that have been radicalized. Actually, I feel bad for them actually, because they've been radicalized to this by the school system and universities and whatnot. But then they'll say, well, that's not racist because of intersectionality. Because they, have been the oppressed for so long, and white people have been the oppressors and colonizers, so they can't possibly be, even if you're talking about some very poor and disadvantaged white person that has never had a chance in his life. He's racist and has white privilege still. But affluent, say, I don't know, executive at BLM with 2 mansions, they are oppressed.
Right.
That's intersectionality, and they can say that with a straight face. So that's why you saw with the Boers that were coming over from South Africa. And I mean, genocide is one of those ones that is like, it's such a fluid term. I don't even get in the weeds on that one, but they are being persecuted and they are being killed and their property taken away, often with the connivance of the government there. And Trump dares to give, they fit asylum 100%. Trump dares to give like a small number of them asylum, not even all that applied. And they just go apoplectic. Why? Because of intersectionality. They're white. Therefore, they don't have the rights to be treated with asylum. And it's the same thing with the migrant thing generally. It's all a function of intersectionality. You can always have these Middle Eastern migrants, always. They can always come here. Some poor white person can't go to Europe and get social programs because, well, he's white. He doesn't qualify because, he doesn't fit the bill for that. But if you're black, I mean, you got white Englishmen on the streets, veterans, right, on the streets, no homes, and yet whatever migrant from whatever Islamic country shows up on their doorstep, and then boom, they get a big hotel somewhere at Steve Spence. Right. So that's intersectionality at work again. And so, and it's all being pushed by language through NGOs. And that's been prevailed upon for these cardinals. You have to adopt this. You have to appoint this. And so, and like when either Francis or Leo start to give these talkings on migrants, right?
Right.
It's all stuff that's pre-written. It's like in the cultural DNA now. It's been like 20, 30 years where this has been pushed so hard and it's been adopted, and NGOs have pushed this language. And so now you have to keep talking about these things. And because it's politically expedient, and now you have these moves in various circles, theological circles, wherever, that it's morally responsible or necessary for Western nations to take in as many migrants as they possibly can, irrespective of what that does to their own local communities.
Right. Right. Yeah, so it's going to be very interesting to see how this pontificate unfolds. Obviously we'll continue watching closely in the coming weeks and months, and we also don't want people to. I think we don't want to like kill all hope in people. That's not the reason why we had this discussion. We just want people to. We want to encourage everyone to be realistic about who, uh, Cardinal Prevost, now Pope Leo, is, and that he may be more like Francis in his thinking than we might like to admit. But
but
we all.
God can still change things around.
Yes.
And he has done it for popes historically. So it could happen that all of a sudden, the grace moves him to move in a different direction. And right. and this, it depends on God's providential will and how he's going to work that out, work some process of restoration. And you can take a more hopeful look, like some people that we've kind of softly criticized and for being excessively on the hopium, it would appear. And at the same time, you can take what I think you and I have a more sober approach. It's like, well, he could. Let's see what he does, but let's be realistic. This is what we have to work with.
Right.
So it's not the end of the story. It's not impossible that it's like, oh no, now the world's going to end. We didn't have a good pope. I mean, I said that with Benedict. People were shocked. I said, no, this guy's actually pretty liberal. And you're like, what? Mm-hmm. Because the media portrayed Ratzinger as like the Pope's Rottweiler, right? As these Germans.
Yeah.
The Pope's attack dog, the Inquisitor. Oh, he heads an office that used to be called the Holy Inquisition, and that's bad. And yet it's like, he's an extremely modern person. And that bears itself out during his pontificate. He just had better aesthetics and, didn't give that appearance of hating a huge segment of the church. So we may end up with a similar type of situation, but I think with all outlets that I saw calling it correctly, it was the UK Telegraph that said that Pope Leo will keep conservatives at bay while continuing to promote Francis's mission, and it highlighted similar things to what we've been talking about tonight. Mm-hmm. To show that conservatives are premature in their praise for him because his tradition shows he's more this way.
Right.
So if
I think I remember that article. Yeah.
Yeah, it is sober-minded thing, not trying to claim him for liberal side or conservative side, just giving an honest assessment. Hey, look at what the guy said.
Right. Yeah, and I think the coming weeks and months will reveal much. I think especially when he starts making appointments to the major dicasteries in Rome, for example, like his choice to lead, whoever he appoints to lead the doctrinal office will be a major sign as to where he stands. The same thing with like if he reconfirms Cardinal Roach, then obviously we know where he stands on the traditional mass, for example. Right. So we shall see. But thank you so much for joining me, Ryan. It's been a great conversation, and we have about 620 some people joining us live. So thank you to everybody who's been watching. And before we end, Ryan, as many of you probably know, is the founder of Mediatrix Press. So I wanted to give him an opportunity to tell us anything new that's coming down the pike with Mediatrix Press. Do a little advertising.
Yeah, I know some shameless grift.
Yes.
And so there hasn't been much news. I took on other responsibilities that slowed me down tremendously. I'm getting out of those in about 2 weeks, and then gonna hit the gas real hard on trying to get new translations out. So I don't have much new yet, but if you never heard of it before, there's a lot there. And and it's a www.mediatrixpress.com.
I'll put the link in the live chat for people to visit your website here, and it's also in the show notes.
And so it's funny. I mean, apart from new translations, everything's pre-Vatican II, but that's principally because of, like, I don't want to exclude our brothers and sisters who are still in the parishes, haven't seen exactly the traditionalist argument yet or whatever. It's just that's the stuff that's public domain, so right. It's easier to republish that way. But we have, like, I've got a full life of St. Alphonsus. I never actually put up the link for volume 3. I got to take care of that. So many things that got to be fixed in this website. But you put it up and like, oh, I got to fix it. Got to get this going again. But anyway, there's St. John Fisher's shredding of Luther in the workshop of St. Joseph. It was a nice little devotional work, actually. historical fiction based on actual historical details for the first century, and it was nicely done, actually, I thought.
Very cool.
And so there's a lot of books there. Bellarmine, obviously. St. Alphonsus Liguori's kind of been in abeyance for a couple of years, and I always get, oh, when's this going to come out? We want to get this. Like, I know. Like, one of those things, and I hit the gas pedals like right at the top of my list is getting all of the moral theology down. Actually, before we go, if you got the time, there's a comment at the very bottom from Pew Victor. Would you pull
I was going to put that up on the screen.
I'm a diocesan seminarian. It's very difficult at the moment. Any suggestions, advice, welcome. Thanks for actually speaking honestly. I would say honestly, don't trust anyone. Number one, no matter how nice tradition they seem to be, keep it to the chest. There's something the Japanese talk about, the threefold fence, right? And you keep an outward appearance, you keep the inner one for your friends, and then you keep the innermost self. You really have to do that in the diocesan seminaries, and there are.
And you speak from experience, right?
Yes, somewhat. Although I wasn't there very long, but but I was in a seminary for a year, and not even a whole year, because I finally realized this ain't going anywhere. If you're not going to Chicago, why are you on the train? So it's a type of thing. There's enemies, hidden and present. There's also friends unlooked for. But keep the actual opinions close to the chest. Keep your devotion to Our Lady, especially. Never fail in the rosary. Never fail in these things. Read the church fathers. Read great theologians. Go above and beyond your material. Don't challenge the professors in your classes. If they're saying something that's just obviously rank heresy, just kind of roll your eyes and deal with it. I didn't do that. I walked out of a class and I got in huge trouble for it. Look, this guy in here telling me, and you've probably heard it at some point in a parish, that the Phoenician woman that comes and asks Jesus to heal her daughter, and he says, "No, I've come to the lost sons of Israel and not to the dogs." And and then but then she professes, it says, "Oh, but Lord, but you can heal her," and so he heals her, and then says that your faith has done this. And so his commentary on this whole thing was, well, she was correcting Jesus for his racism. And I'm sitting here like, do I have to listen to this, really? And I was like, look, I don't have time for rank heresy. You guys got something to teach. And I walked out. Oh, boy. Even though they kind of soft agreed with me, that's why I didn't get expelled. But it's like, don't do that. Keep your head down and try to. You're going to have a tough time when you get ordained. You're going to get in a parish. You're going to have a situation that is probably not going to be agreeable to you, and you've got to take the discernment. Can I manage this? Can I handle this? Or should I be looking at a traditional order? And that's something for you to determine, how you're going to deal with that. And because you will be in a parish, you might get lucky, get a priest that's the pastor, that you're the vicar, and you've got to deal with this kind of situation and try to, preach as best you can. Preach from the fathers, because that's usually unassailable and it's always great material. Do that as best you can. And then, when you get your own parish, just take stock of the bishop, and because they have absolute authority to destroy you if they want, tread carefully and then do the best to sow the seeds of the faith wherever you can. That's my advice if you're going the diocesan route. It may not work in the end. I just got to be honest with you. There'd be the problems in it. But there are a lot of younger priests that in the Novus Ordo that want to be traditional. And because we're trads and we don't like the Novus Ordo, that doesn't mean we have to write those people off, because that's, again, the harvest that the Lord, I think, is working toward tradition, is all the younger movement. And it's just getting the boomers dying, but they will try to destroy you. So don't, to be really, find someone you can trust somewhere else that's not in the seminary that you need to talk to. And that's really my advice to you, honestly.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, thank you. He says, excellent advice. Keep the fight, gentlemen.
Amen.
And you do the same. Yes. All right. Well, I think we'll end there. That's a good stopping point. And hopefully Ryan can join me again sometime for another great discussion. I'll have to join you and the rundown crew at some point again. That would be fun.
Be fun.
And because you guys are back up and running again once in a while, right? You did
generally. Sometimes they miss a week. It just depends on the coordinating schedules, and I think the election of, if nothing else, the election of Pope Leo breathed new life into it, and so we got it all back. Got the band back together.
There we go. All right. Well, as I like to remind folks at the end of these streams, the name of my channel is Veritatis Vox, which is the voice of truth, and I chose that title because that's kind of sums up what I want this channel to be about, is to be a voice for the voice of truth, who is ultimately our Lord, and also to remind us of it's an allusion to John 18:37, our Lord's words to Pontius Pilate, that he came into this world. The whole reason he was born and came into the world was to give testimony to the truth, and that those who are of the truth hear his voice. So it's a kind of a reminder that there are those who are of the truth and those who are not. Just like there will, at the end, there will be the sheep and the goats. Had a good conversation with Monsignor Charles Pope yesterday about that with his new book, The Hell There Is. It's a really good read, actually. It's not a downer like you think it might be with the subject. But we just want to make sure that we are the ones who are of the truth and who are knowing and loving the truth and living it in our lives. So God bless you all, and until next time, everybody have a happy Ascension Thursday. That's the next feast we're looking forward to.
Amen.
All right. So take care, and Godspeed to everybody.
God bless.